Green River case is the most unusual case, I think, in the history of this country.
Explorer scouts have found the remains of another human body buried on a wooded hillside near Seattle.
You're talking about 60, 70, possibly 80 victims.
We spent so much time recovering remains that there wasn't that much time to actually investigate the murders.
I can remember saying, if we can get some other forensic evidence, we got it.
Advances in technology helped solve this case, no doubt about it.
He was the most prolific serial killer in the history of the United States. It was like looking into the eyes of pure evil. This is the most unusual case, I think, in the history of this country. Having been a police officer for 33 years, being the lead detective on that, that's the experience that I speak from.
This case took 20 years. Not 1, not 5, not 10, not 15. It took 20.
Kent is south of Seattle, about 30 miles or so. And the Green River, just kind of a slow, meandering river that goes through the South Seattle Valley. In 1982, when I started this case, it was a pretty peaceful, kind of out-of-the-way place. On August 15th, I got a phone call. I was told to go to the Green River. A rafter had seen what he first thought were mannequins pushed up along the riverbank. We began to interview the rafter and told us that he saw a white male who waves at him. Then he quickly gets in a pickup truck and drives off. Then he said, as he got closer, he recognized that these weren't mannequins. They were dead bodies. I remember this victim, one of her hands and arms were free. And as the water gently flowed down the river, her hand was waving in the current, sort of like, here I am. Help. Next, I had to figure out, how did the suspect get the bodies to that point? Did he carry them? Were they still alive when he took them down to the riverbank? Were they already dead? And then I discovered another body. She was a young African-American female who was partially nude. The next step in trying to solve a case like this is through the autopsy. There were 2 victims that contained bodily fluids left behind by someone who had a sexual encounter with them. Those samples today would be immediately tested for DNA, but back in 1982, DNA was an unknown technology. The samples collected were frozen, and the best that we could hope for was a blood type. But the victims could be identified through fingerprints and dental records. The one on the bank was Opal Mills, and the 2 in the river, Cynthia Hines and Marcia Chapman.
one of the women that was assigned to working in sex crimes. When we identified Marcia Chapman as being one of the women in the river, that struck me hard, because I had, probably within the few months prior to her death, met her, and she had been a victim of an assault. It was hard to know that someone I had tried to help ended up running across somebody that killed her. So I had a personal connection with that particular case. And so I was asked to join the team that was going to be looking at the initial victims who were found on the Green River.
When I started this case on that August 15th, I was already working the case in January of 1982. A 16-year-old girl, Leanne Wilcox, who had been working the street, who had been killed. And in July of 1982, Wendy Caulfield was found in the Green River. And then on August 12th, Debbie Bonner had been discovered. With the victims found in the Green River, that was 6 dead bodies.
As we look into who the victims are, it became clear that the connection was prostitution.
Very often, we're talking about a 15-year-old little girl, a 16-year-old little girl coming from dysfunctional homes, domestic violence, and they end up on the street working on what we called the strip back then.
There was a lot of prostitution activity, a lot of drug activity, and a lot of crime.
On a Friday night, you can count hundreds of young women standing on the street corner. We also discovered the victims were all strangled. The reality that hit us was that all of these young girls could have been killed by the same person, and we need to have a task force. So we started out with about 20 or 25 detectives because we were very certain that we had a serial murder on our hands.
Most serial murder cases are stranger homicides. There is no connection that you can investigate in the victim's background that's going to bring you to the suspect. They come together for the first time, and that's usually the last time for the victim. That makes it difficult to solve a serial murder case.
When you know you're working a serial killer, a lot of things start running through your mind. The thought was, anything is possible with this guy. We don't know if he's a resident here. We don't know if he's a transient. And it's always at the forefront of your mind that the next day you could find another victim.
I think history has shown us that unless they're in jail or in prison or dead, they don't stop. Serial killers don't stop. They have to keep doing it.
The news that we were investigating a serial murder case spread rather rapidly. And sometimes that brings certain people out of the woodwork that want to be involved in investigations like this. I had already called the FBI Behavioral Science Center, and they said one of the things that a killer might do is to call and say, I want to help, I want to be involved. And what that does, of course, is gives them the opportunity to know what's going on if they get close enough.
Oh, Sheriff's Office.
The guy, Melvin Foster, called and offered his help and said, I think I may have known some of these victims.
Thanks for your call.
We discovered he was a cab driver. He was out and about in the areas where the young women were engaged in their activities and or missing. So that, certainly set up red flags for us.
So we brought him in, He was one of those characters that you couldn't ignore. We interviewed him. We discovered he had warrants out for his arrest. We asked him to take a polygraph test.
The polygraph is a device that's designed to measure your heart rate, your blood pressure, your skin conductance, and your respiration rate. And it's based on the idea that by measuring those, it can capture when a person's lying.
He said he knows some of the victims. Then he says he doesn't know some of the victims. Then he says he does know as his stories changed. Melvin Foster failed the polygraph test. So we put him under surveillance. We spent a lot of time on him. We got a search warrant for his house. And we found some photographs of naked women. But we found no physical evidence that connected him directly to any of the bodies that we found. And all we had was a failed polygraph. This was not enough to make any sort of case and arrest him. After not making any progress with Melvin Foster, there was a decision made in late '82 that the task force would be cut back.
For the most part, in 1983, we weren't finding any more victims. And I think at that point, it may have been just Reichert and I who were left to follow up on this case.
You had victims' families who were angry. They were disappointed in us. They were critical of us. They felt that we didn't care.
We're calling attention to the fact that these women are being killed, and anything is better than nothing.
It hurt for people to feel that way. I mean, we were committed to solving the case.
And then other bodies started to be found.
In Seattle, another grim discovery today that could be connected to the string of Green River murders, which have shaken that West Coast city.
Late into 1983, we had 13 victims.
This investigation ebbed and flowed. In '84, all of a sudden, it ramped up again.
In Seattle this morning, police are hunting a mass murderer believed to have killed as many as 21 prostitutes in the last 22 months. David Burrington reports.
Been called the Green River Killer ever since the first bodies, 5 of them, were pulled from this river. Since then, 7 more bodies have been discovered nearby, all those of young prostitutes, according to police. And the number of missing increases steadily. 2 were added to the list this week.
Every month we were finding 2 or 3 more bodies. We spent so much time recovering remains that there wasn't that much time to actually investigate the murders.
You can't be a robot in this job. There is no way in the world that you can't get emotionally involved. When you collect bodies day after day, week after week, the visions of those bodies stay in your memory forever.
About 1985, we got a computer. And the computer allowed us to organize the evidence that we had gathered. And a recurring thing that we found was a greenish colored pickup that was seen in the area or possibly with the victim. One of them was the woman identified as Kim Nelson. We learned that Kim Nelson and this other gal, Paige Miley, were standing by the side of the road, and Paige got picked up, leaving Kim Nelson there by herself. And then when Paige came back, Kim was gone, and she never returned. A few days later, Paige was back on the street out there, and she was approached by this man in the pickup truck asking her where her tall friend was. She thought it suspicious, and Page later identified this man from a group of 6 photographs. He was called Gary Ridgway.
We discovered that Ridgway lived in the neighborhood just off this strip. He came across as this very meek, mild-mannered person who gave people the impression that he couldn't hurt a fly. But he had a prior arrest for patronizing a prostitute. He worked at Kenworth Trucking as a painter in Renton, which was maybe 40 minutes from his home.
We found that there was a definite spike in the number of cases when there was a strike at Kenworth, and Gary was off work for a lot of that time. So he was available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
As we looked at Ridgway, he just got more and more interesting, and we eventually got to a place where we had probable cause to search his home.
In forensic science, we're trying to place people at a scene, or we're trying to place people together. So we work off the principle of exchange, and that means that when people come into contact with each other, there's very likely some exchange of some fiber, a hair, or body fluid. And our job as forensic scientists is to make sure we collect any of those fibers or hairs or fluids that have been exchanged.
We're looking for anything that is connecting any of the victims together with Ridgway. Any stray hairs, any fibers on the carpet, paint samples from his coveralls, anything that could match the clothing items that we found on our early victims to build a case and arrest him. In 87, 88, 89, we kept finding bodies.
Police in Washington state believe they found the remains of another victim of the so-called Green River killer. 17-year-old Cindy Ann Smith was last seen in March of 1984. Police believe that Smith is the killer's 37th known victim, all of them women ranging from 16 to 36 years of age.
There were so many missing young girls now who have been known to work on the street. You're talking about 60, 70, possibly 80 victims on a list. The missing person count is going up, and the number of victims had gone up. And our main focus was Gary Ridgway. As we investigated him, he just got more and more interesting. On the way to work and on the way from work, he would stop and pick up a prostitute. He became a prime suspect. And so we said, okay, let's give Ridgway a polygraph test.
Although the polygraph is very popular with law enforcement agencies, it is not foolproof at all. On the polygraph, if a person is very nervous, they will look like a liar. For people who are maybe comfortable lying, the polygraph will not detect any anxiety as measured by changes in heart rate, skin conductance, and blood pressure. And they will look calm and relaxed and truthful.
Well, Ridgway passed the polygraph test. We're going, okay, one of the things that we did in 87 was ask him to chew on a gauze. And that gauze collected saliva. And that gauze was put in a test tube and frozen.
If we were to take a swab from someone today, we'd be able to determine without a doubt their DNA. But In the 80s, what you could learn from a saliva test was the person's blood type. That's all we could determine.
There was a lot of evidence gathered from Gary Ridgway's house. It took years for the crime lab to thoroughly analyze all of it. But in the end, nothing matched up well enough with anything that we had forensically to give us what we needed to put us over the top and charge him.
With the investigation not making any progress, there was a decision finally made in the late 80s to begin to downsize the task force. I took a sergeant's test, I got promoted, but the Green River case was not far away. I was working in an area that was right on the strip. It never left my heart, it never left my mind. So, yeah, that was 1990 was a tough time. Time marched on, and the voters of King County decided to go back to an elected sheriff. That was in March of '97, and I ran for election that year and won, and I'm sworn in as the sheriff. I was thinking all this time, after I left in 1990, maybe the case could be reopened. Well, now I'm the sheriff, so that's what I did. In 1997, I reopened the case. I said, look, I want all the evidence in this case thoroughly reviewed. We learned of 2 labs on the East Coast that were involved and engaged in a new science called DNA.
The job of a forensic scientist is to provide support to investigators that are trying to solve these very difficult crimes. And that's why the evolution of DNA has been so amazing.
We knew we had the saliva samples, and we knew we had the spermatozoa samples, and we sent them to one of the labs. They took a look at them and tried a comparison, but they couldn't come up with any definitive answers for us. They said, look, the science is progressing. Wait a little longer because your samples are so fragile and so minute that we could destroy them if we did anything further.
In 2001, the Washington State Patrol Crime Lab came on board with the STR-PCR technologies that can analyze really minimal samples. It was really a breakthrough in forensic DNA analysis.
Before we started using PCR, we had to have a stain that was relatively large. PCR allows us to take small amounts of DNA and copy regions of it over and over and over again until we have more copies of that particular area of the DNA that we're interested in.
In early 2001, I sent the samples to the lab and asked them to analyze the material. We felt this could be the last chance we got with this evidence.
We started with the girls found in the Green River. On some of the autopsy evidence, the swabs, they were completely taken off of the sticks and used in past technologies. We had limited sperm come off those sticks, but enough to generate a male profile from 2 of the victims. We had the same male profile from another victim in a separate crime scene, but we didn't know who it was. We had reference samples collected from potential suspects in the past. Those reference samples were run. One of them matched that of the evidence from the Green River victims.
I got a call from the state crime lab. They asked me to come down. They had something they needed to tell me.
I was away for 4 or 5 days, and Tom waited till I came back. All I knew is that he wanted to sit down and talk to me. So he had 3 sheets of paper, and he flipped over the first sheet, and Tom had drawn the charts out so they were easy to understand.
And I explained to him that this is the DNA profile that was found with Opal Mills.
Then he flipped over a second piece of paper.
This is the DNA profile that was lifted from Marcia Chapman. And then I said, and then this is the DNA profile of the Green River Killer.
And he said, look, you'll notice that the DNA chart is the same. I said, Tom, are you trying to tell me that we know who this guy is? And he goes, yeah. And he pulls out an envelope. It's Gary Ridgway. Yeah, a pretty emotional moment, as you might guess, for all of us.
I remember that. Man, what a sense of relief, almost to tears. You know, it's like, finally, we know who it is, finally.
So we called the team together and we started to decide, okay, now, you know, what's our next move?
Gary Ridgway had been our prime suspect since 1987. We just didn't have the evidence.
So we put him under surveillance. And as we do that, we learn that, yes, he's still contacting young women, prostitutes on the street. And at the same time, we're working with the prosecutor's office in building that case to arrest him. When we finally arrested Ridgway in 2001, it was like the world's weight has been lifted from my shoulders. They brought him to the Regional Justice Center where the command post had been set up. And then I looked at him and I said, "Gotcha, asshole."
Today at approximately 3 p.m., detectives from the King County Sheriff's Office arrested a 52-year-old man for investigation of homicide. The man arrested is Gary Leon Ridgway.
Once he's taken to jail and he's got attorneys, they can start to build their defense.
Mr. Ridgway, his plea is not guilty to all charges.
And their defense was, we recognize, after talking to our client, that he frequented prostitutes. And if his DNA happened to be in the bodies of 3 of the victims, that doesn't mean that he killed those victims. It means he was a customer sometime before their death. And there's always a chance that a defense like that presented could stand up in court, if that's all the evidence we had. I can remember saying, look, if we can get 3 or 4 more victims with some other forensic evidence tied to Gary Ridgway, we got him.
Some of the investigators and the prosecutors working on the case learned of this new process that was being used by a microscopic analysis lab.
We were asked if we would get involved in looking at the evidence and sort of acting as general consultants and trace evidence. For 6 months of pretty intensive work, picking through tiny particles, preparing them for analysis, analyzing them, we had no associations that we could draw. However, as microscopists, we couldn't help looking at the fine dust in the victim's clothing, so we vacuumed some of the clothing, which was in pretty bad shape. Then we started picking through the dust. And that's often one of these eureka moments you have when you're looking at trace evidence. You find sort of the particle or something odd. And we start seeing these colored spheres of spray paint. But why is it that half a dozen prostitutes have spray paint on their clothing? We had, at this time, the ability to do high-quality infrared microspectrophotometry. It's a way of obtaining chemical signature of a compound. We're able to identify this as Imran paint. This is a very unusual paint based on its infrared spectrum, which was being used at the Kenworth truck factory while Ridgway was working there. In the Green River murders, one of the reasons we were brought in is because Ridgway said, I frequented prostitutes. Of course, my DNA is in a lot of prostitutes. But now we have something completely independent of that. Spray paint. By finding the spray paint on the clothing of the victims, what I believe the best interpretation is that they were in contact with Ridgway himself or his environment shortly before they died.
With this evidence, in the spring of 2003, Gary Ridgway was charged with 4 new counts of murder, making it 7 at that point. Within about a month, we started hearing rumors that the defense was considering the possibility of having Gary Ridgway confess in exchange for taking the death penalty off the table.
Discussions began on Ridgway coming forward, admitting guilt, and telling us about 65 murders and showing us where other bodies were.
I thought that was a good thing because there were many victims who were still missing, and the families needed to have some resolution to that.
We took him to our task force headquarters, and discussions began about where the bodies were, what he did to the bodies, why he killed them, all those questions that everybody wanted to have answered. We used to take what we called road trips with Ridgway, showing us where other bodies were. And we were focusing on the Mary West case. In the 80s, Mary West was found in Seward Park in Seattle, just off of Rainier Avenue.
Take a right on Henderson.
He directed the driver exactly down the right roads.
At this light, take a right.
There was no wrong turns anywhere.
The park is straight ahead.
We get into the park. He goes right to a spot that I was at years earlier. And he said,
right in here's where I killed her.
After you killed her, then what did you do?
I drug her in further on a trail that was back there.
You know, to be there years later and with him, it's a feeling you can't describe.
And so we're trying to take you back to that first one and figure out.
Every day for hours on end, he was interviewed by a team of 4 detectives.
Why did you like killing people?
Just hated women, and they're the vulnerable people to do it.
I mean, it's just so hard to describe. It's surreal.
It felt good to kill a woman. It felt good to take their life. And
it was like looking into the eyes of pure evil.
What got Gary Ridgway to the point where he put his hands on somebody and he took their life that day? What was different that day?
That was the day of creating a new me, a new killer.
He had an empty feeling. No soul kind of a look to him. corroborated his statement with his description of the sites.
Okay, right about in here. I just drove in my pickup and camper and parked it, brought her body over and put it a little bit over the hill.
Enough to the point where we felt comfortable that we could charge him with 48 murders. And so he's scheduled to go to court, face the judge, and the judge asks him the question.
So this hearing, Mr. Ridgway, is your last chance to say that you did not commit these 48 counts of aggravated murder. Understand that?
Yes, I do.
And Mr. Ridgway, the state has charged you with 48 counts of aggravated murder in the first degree. How do you plead?
Guilty.
I think he picked on the people he picked on because they were easy, vulnerable. They freely would give their bodies without thinking about how valuable they are. And it was the most heart-wrenching, the most challenging case I'd ever worked on.
I was sitting in the front row of a jam-packed courthouse. I mean, it was really emotional because the families can get up and say their piece.
She was just an immature teenager trying to find her way in life before it was snuffed out by Gary Ridgway.
Some had the courage to say, I forgive you.
Mr. Ridgway, my daughter, she was 16. At the time you killed her, you've made it difficult to live up to what I believe, and that is what God says to do, and that's to forgive. And he doesn't say to forgive just certain people, he says to forgive all. So you are forgiven, sir.
I forgive you. Forgive you for killing my daughter? I mean, boy, that's quite a faith to have.
I felt a sense of relief when he was sentenced, sense of satisfaction that he was going to be held accountable for doing what he did.
The most important thing to remember, though, is the families, because their loved one was taken in such a tragic, violent way, remembering that they will never, ever forget. The pain will never go away.